In this introduction to business budgeting, we're going to talk about why businesses need a budget, what are some quick ways to get started, and what some of the common pitfalls are when it comes to either designing or using a budget on a go-forward basis. So first, let's talk about why businesses need a budget. We have worked with a lot of business owners who don't find value in putting a budget together. We hear things like, it's a waste of our time. I have a lot better things for my team to be working on. I've never found a budget to be useful past the date that it finally gets done. And it doesn't really tell us anything about how to run the business. And those all have some validity to them. But the reasons to do a budget are also varied and can be extremely educational. For one thing, a budget can help get all of the business assumptions out on the table at one time. If you have a management team who's going to be involved in the results of the company, that same management team should have input and insights in the budget. It's always very interesting to see what assumptions people bring to the table that simply cannot be supported by or facilitated through other parts of the business. For example, the sales team can come to the table with a really aggressive sales budget. They're going to add all of these customers, and that's going to really grow the revenue of the company. What's not in their part of the budget is what the production or delivery team has to have in order to be able to fulfill all of those sales. Now, this certainly varies depending upon the type of business that you're in. And there are some sales that are completed very quickly. There are some that have a much longer life cycle. There are some where the sales team or the salesperson is selling and delivering what we're talking about. So sometimes there's not as many disconnects, but it's certainly something to keep in mind. The other thing that can happen is, how are we actually going to get all those customers in the door? Are we going to have to increase our marketing budget? Are we going to have to double it? Are we going to have to do different things that we've been doing in the past to be able to add all of those customers? All of those things will come out when you have more people in the room talking about them. And those are valuable conversations to have no matter what you end up with an end budget product. So some quick ways to get started in terms of doing the budget after you get everybody on board with it being a valuable exercise is to consider what type of industry the company is in, what type of team the company has, and what's the fastest and easiest way to get them through the process. This is particularly true if you've got a company who hasn't historically done budgeting, has been dragging their feet to do it because they don't see the value in it, and have all of these nightmares about how long it's going to take and how much time they're going to have to devote to it. So you can do a budget that's very simple, that doesn't take months to complete, that's really focused on more of the key measurements of the business and not so much filling out every single line item on an income statement or worrying about the balance sheet. Those are the key considerations that I encourage you to think about when putting together a budget and helping your client through the process. And those are, what's the fastest way for us to get started? What are the biggest things that we want to keep our eyes on? What are the measurements that, if they're not going according to plan, whether that plan is a budget or a sales projection or what the owner has in their head, that we're going to know that. If you don't have some sort of a benchmark, which is really what your budget is, it's very hard to know whether you're getting off track. Related to that are the pitfalls that you can find in a budget process, whether you're doing a budget or whether you're measuring against it. The first thing that can happen is that the process gets overly complicated. While it's important to involve as many members of the company as possible, especially those that are responsible for the results or have critical inputs to the process, there is such a thing as too many cooks in the kitchen. And you can end up with a lot of negotiations, a lot of giving in on certain points of the budget that will make it invalid as you go forward and are more likely to lead to comments like, I knew this was a waste of time. I never agreed with that assumption. I don't know why we do a budget. We talked about this before. All of those comments are going to come out as soon as the actual results don't start matching up with the budget. In a future video, we will talk about what to do when the budget doesn't seem to be working. But for now, know that that's a really common pitfall in terms of if you have too many people involved in the process, you can get not the best results. So there is a little bit of an art that goes with who needs to be involved and what input do they need to have. The second pitfall that can happen is that there is a target of perfection and not just progress. The budget is not designed to be perfect. It will never be perfect. It's designed to be a roadmap and a way to assess where the company is going to be going so that if there are key decisions that need to be made around equipment purchases or key personnel additions or even changes in a marketing approach or software that needs to be purchased, any of those things, they can be planned for instead of being surprises. And that's really critical to the success of any company, particularly if it requires some sort of cash outflow or investment. The final pitfall that we'll talk about here is that the budget is more of a marker in the road than it is a living, breathing document. And it can become outdated quickly. Now, that doesn't mean that it's going to be outdated if you do a budget for a calendar year, that it's going to be outdated at the end of January. But as we all know, business moves very, very quickly. And depending upon the type of company that you're working with, if they have growth plans, if there are a lot of things that they've changed their minds about in terms of what they're going to focus on for any variety of reasons, you may find that the budget does become outdated. The pitfall here is that as soon as one part of it doesn't seem to be working, everyone wants to throw the entire thing out the window. And there are a lot of things that you can do to sort of rescue a budget, if you will. And we'll talk about those in a future video as well. But the key piece here is not to let misses in the budget completely derail the whole process. It doesn't mean that the budget wasn't a good budget. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't use elements of it. And it certainly doesn't mean that the whole thing needs to be thrown out the window. It's really that all or nothing thinking that's the biggest pitfall. And that starts all the way back when the budget's being designed, through its completion, and to the usage of it inside the company. As a reminder, we talked about why companies should use a budget, what are some of the best ways to get started, and what some of the common pitfalls are. Hopefully you found some items that were useful in this video, and please, if you did, hit the subscribe button just below so you can be notified when we have new videos released.